on the wrong number. They say, no, 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 you called on the right number, but this is exactly Google has taken over Pizza Hut or something, maybe. And then a lot of conversation happens between the customer and the employee there. And we see that the employee has too much of information. He tells your credit card is maximum used, sir, so you have to pay by cash. You can watch this. This video is there on YouTube, right? So you can go there, just type ordering pizza in the future, and you can enjoy that video because a lot of personal information is actually stored and it is available to any user, right? Any customer who is calling you, right? He knows all your, Google has collected from variety of sources, so all those things are available, so you can keep that information. So where is this big data being used? So as we see, this is something which is maybe people who would have studied database management system, you would have come across data. Data being organized becomes information, and when it is put in context, it becomes knowledge, and when it is applied, it becomes wisdom. So to get to wisdom, we need to start with data. So this huge data is important. Otherwise, there is no value. But because we can get some wisdom out of it, so this data becomes important. So the data, we need to get the information, organize the data, we get information, then we put it in a particular context, it becomes knowledge. And here we see a small example. It is raw data which talks about red and the location is given, right? So it doesn't make any sense. But if you put a meaning, this red is a traffic light, and this location is a particular street, and it has turned red. So because it was red, so that makes more meaning. This is simple data, but when you put it in, when you organize it or you understand it, so it becomes information. So the information in the context is in your own personal context is that you are facing the traffic light. I am driving my car towards the traffic light and it has turned red. So that is the context. Now you have to understand that. After that, if you know the context, then you know that it's a red light, you're traveling in the opposite direction. So obviously, if the light is red, then you know that you need to stop the car. So that is the wisdom that you apply. So this is how data, in fact, the other example of data will be looking at something like this data. If you have some theoretical framework to explain it, it's an information, knowledge. So data can be organized as information, information can be organized as knowledge, and of course, one more step here, which is understanding or applying it, and then you basically get wisdom. So gathering of information from know nothing, it is data. So you know what it is, so you organize it, so it becomes information. Then know how, based on theory and based on some experience, you generate the knowledge, and then you apply it, you get the understanding, and then out of it comes the wisdom. So basically analyzing, deciding, and executing. So it moves from know nothing to know what, to know how, to know why, to know best. So now what we need is we have huge data here. Now what we need is we want to generate wisdom out of it, right? So that is what we can try to look at. So when big data actually started happening, before that, one good advantage what happened was that data storage started increasing. So when we look at, we have what is called network attached storage and storage area network. Some of these terms may be new. Some of you would have heard these terms, people who have studied storage networks or something like that, or people who have just had some interest on storage related technologies, they would have read it, right? There is this mechanism where we have a lot of storage which is connected over a network, right? This is called storage area network. Then there is a network to which a storage is attached. It is called network attached storage. So here what happens, there are variety of servers, and all these servers are connected to one NAS appliance or network attached storage. So that is called NAS, network attached storage. There is one storage, huge storage device, and multiple devices which are connected over the TCP/IP network are connecting to the NAS appliance, the network attached storage. The second example that we look at is called a storage area network. So there are many servers which are running, and there are many storage devices which are there. And all these tape drives and RAID servers are connected by SAN switches or SAN fabric. So that is what is called storage area network. Usually, this is all Ethernet traffic, but this traffic is fiber channel traffic, FC traffic. Maybe some of you may get confused with fiber channel. Fiber channel is nothing to do with optical fiber cable. Obviously, fiber channel traffic flows through optical fiber cable, but fiber channel is different from optical fiber cable. OFC is different from FC. FC is basically a protocol, fiber channel, like TCP/IP protocol suite we have. Similarly, you have the fiber channel protocol. Maybe, of course, it's beyond the scope of this lecture. So you can actually try to read more about fiber channel in comparison with TCP/IP. You can just go. The word also is slightly different because optical fiber is FIBER, fiber, but fiber channel is FIBRE, fiber channel. Fiber channel is a protocol like TCP/IP protocol, and like you have Ethernet switches, you will have SAN switches, storage area network switches, which are basically and of course, just and then you can combine switches, and they call them FCO Ethernet switches. Of course, maybe slightly not relevant, but you need to understand the hardware which is actually below the big data, because we need to understand big data from a superficial level, like how we understand database management system, because database management system we don't actually understand how the how the data is getting stored. Maybe as we move ahead somewhere we will discuss that about database management system. So the other motivation for big data analytics was basically that modern systems have to deal with huge data, which has inherent value. We saw that business proposition, and we want to collect that data and use it, and we cannot discard all this data, but huge data, how do we do it? So if the data is there, now data has to be taken to the processors, and data has to be brought back from the processing. So earlier, if you have studied in computer science, you have studied a concept called stored program concept. Earlier, computers were like a building. You used to put the data from one room, go and collect the data from another room, right? So something like that. It was a huge computer built in a building. But now computers are very small. So what happens? Data is not fed from one side, and output is not taken from the other side. Everything is stored in the hard disk itself. So the data is on the hard disk, the program is on the hard disk. So it was a stored program concept. But still, the data is brought to the processor. So you have program, you store it as a file or you store it as a database. The program fetches the data from the file, takes it to the processor. The processor computes it, and the result is sent back to the storage. So this is how we tend to see the results, and or it can be displayed onto the screen. This is fine, but the biggest problem is now when the data becomes too huge, how do I transmit data to the processors? How do I bring back the data to the processors? That's a big problem. The another important problem that we see with huge data is when I want to run with huge data, I can't run on a single system. Now, when I can't run on a single system, what I will do? I will have to use 4 or 5 systems. Let us say you have 1 TB hard disk and you want to analyze 25 TB data. How do you do it? So you either need 25 systems or you need a huge storage mechanism. But when you want to run the program, you will have to bring it to one system. So now if I'm using 25 systems and working with the data of 1 TB each, which is 25 TB stored in 25 systems, or in a storage attached network, network attached storage or storage area network. I use some nodes there. Let us say this huge data is stored in multiple systems, and one of the system fails, my whole result will fail. So there is another problem with that. Secondly, now there is a big file that you are working with, and now you want to add some more data to that file. So it again becomes difficult, or if the data is huge, it has to be added. So while the systems are running, to add them is becoming difficult. At the same time, the load on the system should result in a graceful decline in the performance. It must not abruptly fail. So this is the motivation with which we go out. So what they did, the suggestion was, instead of scaling out to petabytes, okay, so what you do is instead of scale out, right? So you use the huge data and distribute the huge data, right? That was the first step. Second step, we will look at the core principles, then we'll understand. The second thing was they used processing jobs which are sent to the data instead of shipping the data to be processed. So what happens? Instead of taking data to the computer or the processor, you are taking the processing jobs are sent to the data, the other way around, right? So this is how a limitation actually gives rise to a solution. What is a limitation? Array, how should I move this whole data to the processor? Becomes very difficult. So immediately the solution comes from that. Okay, if I can't move the data to the processors, can I move the processing elements to the data? So that is a wonderful thought here. People thought differently. Okay, if this cannot be done, it is difficult to do that. Why don't we do the other way around? Because taking a programming code in few KBs is easy. Next, Hadoop doesn't impose a single data format, so it can handle easy data. It can handle structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So that is the beautiful advantage. There are variety of data elements. Then it manages fault tolerance and also data replication automatically. We'll come to understand this in this core principles. Now, what are the core principles of big data? So you scale out rather than scale up. Scale out rather than scale up. Scale out means instead of running or making one system very powerful, split up the power into multiple systems. So instead of using one powerful server, use 10 normal systems, which will be more powerful than one powerful server. Bring code to data rather than data to code. This is a big paradigm shift. What was done earlier? You used to take data to code. Okay, you have to sort a big file, right? The file would come to the processor, then the whole computation would be done, and the result will be going back to that file. But now what is happening? File is stored in individual machines, code is going to different machines. So that's a whole different paradigm shift. We'll understand that. Then deal with failures. How do you deal with failures? If 10 systems are there, if one system is failing, what should we do? Right? So obviously it would be a good question to discuss. I don't know how the mechanism is there to answer, but okay, let me go ahead with the answer. Right? Let me give you the answer. We deal with failures by having what is called redundant machines. Right? So if some systems are failing, there must be another redundant system. So how that can be done is also coming up. And lastly, this is where I wanted to bring in the example of database management system. If you look at DBMS, you have commands for insert, group, delete, update, and variety of SQL commands, data management commands, which can be used in DBMS. But if I ask you where the data is getting stored, so how the data is getting stored? And immediately many of you will answer, they are getting stored as tables. Okay, very good. But how is a table getting stored? What is a table? Oh, you said table is a huge two-dimensional array. Yes, very good, two-dimensional array. Now, how is this two-dimensional array getting stored in a DBMS? Okay, many of us usually don't come to that fifth chapter, which is in databases. The last chapter deals with how the data gets stored. What is the physical storage mechanism, right? And we don't actually pay a lot of attention to it. Now you will remember if I tell something about B plus trees, right? We study B plus trees in database management system. Why do we study B plus trees? Because the architecture, the data structure that is used to store elements is a B plus tree or a B tree. Now, but who does this process? Because when we do insert, when we do delete, when we do update, when we do group by, when we have a select clause or whatever, none of these things we are handling. Who is handling for us? So we understand that the DBMS does everything for us. The Oracle DBMS or MySQL DBMS, The management system does it. So the complexity of what is happening inside is actually handled by the software itself. So in fact, these core principles, as we look at, it is scale out rather than scale up. It is harder to and more expensive to scale up. So you can't get more resources on an existing node. And if you have the huge data growth, you can't have Moore's law won't allow you to get such things. And whenever resources are getting over, you have to buy new units. And it is also called scaling vertically. So scaling vertically is not a good example. So what do? You scale out. So what do? You add more nodes and machines to an existing distributed application. If the application was running on one server, now we use 5 servers. So that will give you the power, because instead of one powerful server, it is more effective if you have 5 normal servers, because you can divide the load onto 5 machines. A software layer is designed for node additions and removal. So there is a software which is running on all these 5 nodes. The initial level, it was clustering or grid. These are softwares which were used, grid computing software or cluster softwares. So you have a cluster software. In fact, Hadoop is basically a clustering software. So they are all bounded by a single distribution system. So that is what Hadoop is, right? And then you can scale down as well. The second thing is bring code to data rather than take data to code. So let me explain this. Maybe you would not have understood it, right? So what happens? You would have heard about what is called parallel computing. In fact, when you talk about MapReduce is parallel computing. So what it does, a huge data is there. Let us say you wanted to multiply a 10,000 by 10,000 matrix, two-dimensional matrix, which was having 10,000 rows and 10,000 columns. Now, if you want to multiply, what should happen? For I is equal to 0, I is less than 10,000. For j is equal to 0, j is less than 10,000. So this has to multiply. So the loop goes on. One element it takes, one element it takes, multiplies, right? And then you get the result and you store it in Cij, right? So it takes huge time. Cij is equal to Aik into Bkj. Each time the I, J, K values as they are 10,000 by 10,000. If you do it, so it takes huge time. But if I have an option where I can select some 1,000 elements in one time, instead of taking one element, I can select some 1,000 elements and I can multiply it with another 1,000 elements. So what I can do, I can do 1,000 elements of a row and take 1,000 elements of a column, and I can multiply it in one unit. So there is a huge uh, saving on time. And this is facilitated by languages like CUDA and OpenCL, or earlier there were message passing interface MPI or OpenMP. Right? Some of these languages maybe you can skim through, because the time is not sufficient. I'm not able to really do that. But earlier it was MPI, message passing interface, or OpenMP, which is slowly moved into become CUDA when NVIDIA came. CUDA, Compute Unified Device Architecture, but it is a programming language. So CUDA programming environment is created, and then you can, this will run only on GPUs, okay, graphical processing units. And some of you who are working on deep learning, you may be very much aware of these graphical processing units. And in fact, CUDA is one of the background for TensorFlow. If you have learned TensorFlow libraries and deep learning libraries, you would have seen a lot of parallel programming happens there, and it is built on these CUDA and OpenMP and OpenCL kind of programming environment. So MapReduce is a programming paradigm which is parallel. So what I do, there's a huge program which I want to run on this huge data. Let us say that the example that I was talking about, 10,000 by 10,000. Instead of taking 10,000 elements one by one, if I take 1,000 elements at one time and 1,000 elements at one time, so instead of taking 10,000 by 10,000 of units of processing units, now it will take 10 by 10 times of processing units. So just imagine 10,000 by 10,000 will be so much, 10 by 10 will be just 100. So just look at the scale down of time that is used, which happens when you do it in parallel processing. So that is the power of parallel processing. Of course, parallel processing will need a lot of resources. Now, when you ask me what are the differences, in CPU and GPU. The CPU is able to do a very powerful job, but it may have maybe 4 cores maximum. i7 will have 4 cores. Maybe on the mobile phone you have Snapdragon and all that processors which are maybe 8 cores. But by and large, you see it's a very low end this thing that we tend to understand, right? So, uh, but in GPU, you have some 1,000 cores, but 1,000 cores which can do simpler jobs, right? In CPU, you can do a powerful job, something which requires some megahertz and gigahertz. 2 gigahertz, 3 gigahertz is our processor speed. So it can do a very powerful job, but it can do limited jobs. It can do 4 jobs or 5 jobs simultaneously, 4 core or 8 core, depending on that, right? But if you talk about GPU, it can run some 1,000 cores it may have, but it may run only 5 megahertz jobs. Small jobs, but many jobs. So that is where we look at, when we look at the huge data which has to be analyzed, the data analysis may be small, and the program itself, if it is going from one place to another place, it's usually in KBs. The code is easy to be moved, because if you want to move 20 TB of data to a processing unit or a server, it becomes very difficult. If you can take a program to the data, program is usually in KBs. 2 KB, 3 KB data has to go, and the program has to run on that data. So what usually happens is there's a big cluster and there are nodes which are created, and each node has a storage and a processor unit. So what happens, a Hadoop cluster with the big program is split into small threads. You know what is threads or processes. And then these are going to these individual units and they are getting executed there. So the processors execute code and access the underlying local storage. So most of the data that is coming and getting stored in these storage devices. The program comes and using the local processor, it executes on that storage, takes a partial result and goes back, right? So that is easy. The result is also smaller. The program is also smaller. Then we talked about node failures. How do we happen? So what happens if a node fails? The master will detect the node failure and reassign the work to a different node. Now, if you look at actually the working of this mechanism, we see that what actually happens is a big program is there. The big program has to run on this huge data. Let us say I have 10 TB of data. I have split into 10 machines of 1 TB each. 10 TB data has gone into one machine each. Now one big program is coming and it has to run. So I create 10 threads of the same program, send it to one machine. So all the 10 programs are running on all the 10 TB of data. And then I'm getting back the result. So 10 are running parallel, because if I run one after the other, it would take 10 minutes. Now what happens? All the 10 are running, it will be over in 1 minute. So 1/10, that is the speed up that is coming up. So that's so beautiful. But now the question that I'm talking about is, if a node fails, how do I manage it? So what actually happens is the data that we have is split into multiple machines and also replicated. Replicated means more data is going. So Hadoop handles node failures because it will immediately understand. Let us say if I split 10 threads and send it to 10 devices, now 10 devices are running. If one of the device fails, Hadoop understands and then it restarts that task, right? So that is what actually happens. So if a fail node later restarts, so the jobs which have been there have already been suspended. So another this thing can be done, right? And if a node is appeared to be running slowly, another redundant, another instance is also started with the same task, whichever finished first will be used. In Hadoop, what happens is they use what is called replication, what I told. Now, a MapReduce, let us say this file is getting stored in these 5 servers. This file is actually now replicated. What do you mean by replication? There are five chunks or 5 blocks, let us say, in one file. Now, these 5 blocks are replicated into 3 times, because the replication factor here is set to 3. So, this 5 blocks will become 15 blocks. And these 15 blocks have gone into these 5 systems. So each system has got 3 blocks. Now each system has got 3 blocks, but if you see block number 2 is available here, is available here, and is available here at 3 locations. So if one of the machine fails, if one of this machine fails, let us say 1, 3, and 4 are here, but one is available here and here. Now, if this node fails, so the Hadoop will tell this node that, Baba, this one, the program was running on this one, now it has failed. So now you start executing. So even if this node goes down, I will get the exact result because one is available here. So like that, of course, you may ask a question, sir, what if all the 5 fail? Then obviously the result will fail, right? But Hadoop at least helps. If let us say these two systems fail, you can still take this one slot and still manage, right? Here you have 4 slots which are going on, and these 4 slots are actually helping you so that you can take one of them, and then you can take that, right? So that is what is the basic thought here, right? So you can the usually the replication factor. Now, what does MapReduce do? Right? So the whole program is split into multiple chunks. So in fact, I was talking about one program going to 10 places, right? But now, when I explain this concept of replication, what has happened? These 10 chunks have gone into 10 machines, but have gone as 30 chunks or 30 blocks. 10 TB of data divided into one block each of 1 TB. So 10 1 TB blocks are there. They have to be stored in 10 machines. I don't store 10 blocks. I store 30 blocks. So each file is replicated 3 times and it goes to these. So 10 systems will have 30 blocks. Of course, more data is getting used, but what is the beauty is even if one system like this is failing, you still get 100% result. Otherwise, if let us say you use without replication and one system fails, you out of 10 systems, one system fails, you say my result is 90% accurate. Will you take that prediction? You will not agree to that. No, 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 no. I want 100% accuracy. I can't manage with 90%. So that is why you will need to replicate. Now, who does this replication? Do the programmer has to decide? Of course, the programmer can decide whether it is 3 times or 5 times or 2 times or no replication. You can decide, right? But once you decide it as 3 times, who keeps track of where the system, where the data has gone, who is keeping control of the data? It is not your job. The job is handled by Hadoop. So this is the beauty of big data analytics. As we look at, most of the things are handled by this thing. And lastly, as I was talking about, the complexity is abstracted by Hadoop. A lot of these, replication factor, how the blocks are divided, how the programs are being distributed, how the threads are handled, how the system level challenges, whether the data is completed, whether the program is executed, whether the job is completed, pipelines, partitioning, code distribution, MapReduce codes going to the data and data returning the results. All these things are handled by Hadoop itself. Just like how the data is getting stored and retrieved in the case of your what is called DBMS programs, right? So when you give some instructions in Hadoop, so all those things are handled effectively. So that headache, the developer doesn't have to do it. Developer has to do only on the application and business logic. He need not really worry on what is actually happening below, right? And that's where we see that Hadoop is used heavily in LinkedIn. It is used in it is used in Facebook. It is used in many places. A lot of places you see on social network analysis, content optimization, network analytics, fraud analysis, promotion, recommendation systems, entity analysis, sequence analysis. A lot of these things do happen, right? So these are the Hadoop cases. But where did it all start? So if you look at it, it started with this Google file system and the MapReduce and Bigtable. 3 papers, all 3 papers were by Google. Trying to see if I can connect. Let me check. Yeah, this is maybe you'll not be able to see this, right? Are you able to see the file? The Google file system paper. Are you able to see? Okay, let me show you those 3 papers. Let me. Let me share those files to you. Just they are here. So are you able to see, hopefully you are able to see the papers now? Can somebody respond?
Yes, sir.
So this is a paper by Google. So Google file system. This was the first paper, and you'll be happy to see Sanjay Khemawat working with Google Indian, who came up with this file system, and this became the basis for what is called the Hadoop distributed file system, HDFS. Right. So this paper came somewhere. If you see, this came in 2003. Right. So we are now discussing after maybe 17, 18 years. But this paper, and in fact, if the paper was published in 2003, I was just thinking Google would have used it a few years earlier also, maybe 2000 onwards. So 20 years old technology is what we are discussing here, but nothing bad about it. We are, at least we are looking at it. And so this is a paper that I would advise you to read. Another paper that I talk about here is the MapReduce, the mechanism between MapReduce. Again, Sanjay Khemawat has contributed for the MapReduce technology also, simplified data processing on large clusters. So you can read this paper too. And the other paper that I talk about is Bigtable. Bigtable also talks about again Sanjay Khemawat, and I think one more Tushar Chandra is also there. So, but here we have the Bigtable, which is the distributed storage system, the database of on Hadoop you can talk about, which is the closest is the HBase. Yeah. So these are papers based on which based on which we are able to build the technology. It's called Hadoop distributed file system. So this is where these three papers. So later, this moved on to what is called an Apache Hadoop, right? So this is where about 40 companies have joined together and formed what is called Hadoop. Companies like Yahoo, Facebook, Apple, Cloudera. After that, I don't think Google has contributed much to Hadoop, but most of the other companies have worked hard, and a lot of people are contributing, and there's an ecosystem that is there. So this is the Hadoop ecosystem. Most of you may be aware of this. This is the ecosystem where we talk about HDFS. I was talking about GFS, the Google file system. The Google's file system is the basis for HDFS. MapReduce here. This is the MapReduce programming framework, which works with the data. Right. This is where you interface, and on top of that, you have variety of tools which can run. So you have, you can have a Hive, which are query commands. The query commands will get converted to MapReduce commands, which will interact with the data. So this is one thing. There is R Hadoop. You have a lot of these R connectors for statistics purpose. Anybody using, if you are favorite in R language, then you have an interface where you have the R Hadoop. R Hadoop works with MapReduce. MapReduce works with HDFS. Mahout is a machine learning mechanism like scikit-learn or Weka. So you have Mahout, which is inbuilt onto Hadoop. Pig language is like a JavaScript scripting language. Pig is a programming language. In fact, it's called the Pig Latin, the programming language. The Woozy is a workflow manager. Similarly, you have Zookeeper, Flume. Flume collects the logs directly from internet. Scoop is SQL to Hadoop. The word Scoop stands for SQL to Hadoop. So you can convert from SQL to Hadoop or Hadoop to SQL. You can convert using Scoop. HBase is what is built on the Bigtable. Bigtable and HBase are very close. They are called columnar stores. It's a data storage. So you have, and then Ambari, which is basically a cluster management software. This whole thing becomes a Hadoop ecosystem, right? And maybe just to briefly introduce, but if you ask me, the Hadoop ecosystem, it is now become almost like a periodic table, right? So there are so many words. Of course, I think it may not be very clear for you, but Falcon, Zookeeper, Drill, Pig, Spark, Hama, HBase, Tez, HDFS, MapReduce, Yawn. These are all important ones. Scoop, Sentry, Hue, Chukwa, Kafka. Variety of ecosystem has increased, and you will be surprised. But let me briefly introduce you to the ecosystem. HDFS is built GFS, which is a distributed file system. I will talk about a little bit about this. Then we have the MapReduce, which is the distributed parallel data processing model. and the execution environment for handling large data sets. So that's what is MapReduce. Yarn is a framework for job scheduling and cluster management. HBase. Hello. Hello. Yeah. So similarly, HBase we just introduced, like it is built on Bigtable. Then we have the PIG, the scripting language. Hive is a query language, SQL query language, and Cassandra is also a database. Mahout is the scalable machine learning and data mining library. Chukwa is a log analysis and data collection system for managing large. Hello.
Hello, muted, sir.
There is some disturbance coming. So
Please mute your phone or system, sir.
yeah, can I continue?
You can continue,
Sir,
sir.
somebody,
Yes, sir, you can continue, sir.
Yeah, there
sir,
was some
somebody
disturbance. He
participant
was speaking.
unmuted the mic.
Yeah,
One
sure.
second. Somebody participants unmuted the mic, so you have an authority. Can you please mute them? For example, Emmanuel Pilli is the one of the person, and Dr. V. Sangeeta. These two people are unmuted the mics.
Yeah, Emmanuel Pilli is the speaker. I am the one.
Yeah, sorry. Dr. V. Sangeeta. You can mute them.
Yeah. Yeah. So shall I start? Shall I continue?
Yes.
Yeah. So just to introduce the some of these aspects. So PIG, as I told you, is so some of these things we have discussed, right? Flume, you can connect the data from directly moving it from internet. You can directly connect it to the Hadoop environment. So Flume is able to connect. Scoop is able to do it from HDFS. It can bring the data from SQL. Oozie is a tool to provide a way to define an entire workflow. Hue is a graphical interface front end, and Zookeeper is available for coordination service, right? Similarly, Avro, Spark. Spark is the replacement kind of thing for machine learning, stream processing. You can have, instead of writing MapReduce codes, you can write Spark codes. Spark can be written, MapReduce is usually written in Java codes, but Spark can be used, which is basically available in Python. So we will look at that. So let me show you this Hadoop ecosystem, which is there on GitHub, right? So let me just share that link with you. So the link I have already shared, but let me share the web page. So as you yeah, so here you can see, hopefully you are able to see the Hadoop ecosystem table. Please look at this link, Hadoop ecosystem table.github.io. On GitHub, this whole thing is playing, the whole Hadoop ecosystem. So if you look if you look at the number of applications which are there, so HDFS, then you have different options which are coming up. The cluster file system, which is by Red Hat. system QFS from Quast file system, the Ceph file system, the Lustre file system. So just imagine these are all part of Hadoop now, right? You can give, and then programming, earlier it was only MapReduce, but now you have Ignite, Pig language, you have JQL, you have Spark, you have Storm, and you have Flink, Apex, PigPen, SIMR, Corona, Facebook uses Corona, Reef, 12, like that. If you see, I just don't want to, so because I'm sharing the link with you, you can go through this whole list, and then we'll discuss something about NoSQL databases. Maybe if we get time tomorrow, we will look at the NoSQL databases. I talked about HBase, which is column data model, Cassandra, Hypertable, and all that. And the document data model, MongoDB, RethinkDB, ArangoDB, and stream data model, event store, and key value data models. You have LinkedIn uses Voldemort, Redis uses database, and like that. Similarly, graph data model, you have these things. So different NoSQL databases, new SQL databases, and SQL on Hadoop, Hive, Impala, Drill, variety of this whole thing. So just imagine how much of data is available here and what can be done, right? So these are all the tools which can, for machine learning, you can see Mahout, Weka, Oryx, deep learning 4J, and H2O, sparkling water, and then the benchmarking, then security, then metadata management. So system development frameworks, and all these things are coming up. So and still categories which are not yet which are pending. So these are the categories. So I just wanted to bring this to your notice, because these are so many things which are available in big data. Now, what all can be done? Sky is the limit. You can go on and on and on. So this is the ecosystem table. You can search with this Hadoop ecosystem table on GitHub. You will immediately get it, and then go and read through all these things like Yarn, Storm, Spark, Lucene, Uzi, Pig, Drill. So variety of these things, Scoop and Flume, right? So this is again another snapshot of the ecosystem, right? So HDFS, Yarn. Yarn stands for yet another resource negotiator. Basically, it is a distributed resource management layer which helps to handle the MapReduce codes, right? So how you distribute them, MapReduce and Yarn work together. So the MapReduce is basically a parallel programming paradigm. Then we'll look at that a little bit. Pig and Hive, which talk about the top level data processing engine, the data warehousing on top of Hadoop. HBase, which is a column-oriented databases. Then you have Drill, Hama, Crunch, like that, variety of data analytic components. Each of them are under one heading. The core components are this. Then you have the data processing, which is basically Pig, which is scripting language, and Hive is a query language. NoSQL, which are databases. NoSQL doesn't mean SQL is not there. That is not the meaning. NoSQL means not only SQL. That means it is more than SQL. That is what NoSQL stands for, not only SQL. Data analytic components like Drill, Hama, Crunch, Mahout, and Lucene, and then serialization, Avro, and Thrift. Transfer, as we have seen, Chukwa, Flume, and Scoop. Management components, Uzi, H catalog. Monitoring components, Ambari, Zookeeper, and Hue. Hue means Hadoop user experience, that is the front end or a web interface which is there. You can look at that. So these are the basic idea behind this. And if you look at data scientist and a data committee was the data was not much, as you see the number of papers which are lying there. But if you look at a data scientist, it becomes too huge, the data that he is searching, right, or analyzing, right? So earlier it was a small server and you could run it. Now it is huge data centers which need it. So growth is too huge, right? Earlier you used to write smart algorithms, but now smart algorithms won't run on this huge data. So always when the data is huge, these algorithms are not sufficient. You have to break, right? Earlier tape data, so data used to be stored, and then people used to forget the tape drives, never used to open it because data was like dead. Once the data is 1 year old, no use. Oh, that data is irrelevant. But now that 1 year data, 5 year data, 10 year data, they become relevant, and it is like money. It is a money plant. It is not a dead. Data is not dead. Data gives, in fact, somebody says data is the new oil, right? So they talk about it that way. So that is something that we can look at. And if you look at relational databases, they were like a fast car, right? So when you want to do OLAP analytics or asset transactions, you use it. But Hadoop is like a railway engine. Now, when you look at both these things, what do you think is more powerful, if you ask? Right? Obviously, when you look at it, this is more powerful, right? Because it can pull some 100 carriages or at least 20, 30 railway bogies can be attached to this and this can drive it, right? Whether this doesn't have that much of power, right? But the point that is happening is this can go anywhere, right? But when you take a Hadoop environment, this can run only on the railway track. You can't take it on any of the roads, right? If you want to go somewhere, you can't. It goes only on a particular mechanism. Here, data can be updated. Data can be, you can add more data and update more data. But it is very difficult to update data in Hadoop. So another set of new storage can be done because you can't go into Hadoop and update few values. Very difficult because the Hadoop is not stored as rows and columns. It's not stored as a table. You can't go to such and such a location and modify it. Very difficult because it is replicated. If you want to modify data in Hadoop, you have to modify it in 3 places. So first you have to identify where the 3 places are, then go to that location and update it. Very difficult. So there are certain things that Hadoop can do very powerfully, very conveniently, very fast. But there are certain things it cannot do. So you need to identify where you want to use databases. You still need to use databases only. And where you want to use Hadoop, that is where you want to. And that's absolutely only when data is too huge. So that is where the whole idea comes, right? So that is the thought process. So before I take up Hadoop file system and give you an introduction, I just want to take a few questions if there are any. So I'll just stop the sharing and then give you an option. Any questions? So just completed an hour, 1 hour. So I just wanted to take some feedback. Have you understood any questions on principles of Hadoop or how Hadoop is working? If all is clear, we'll start the first category of the thought that is there. How to handle big data, so you can go ahead with HDFS. Okay, so let's continue with HDFS. Yeah, so HDFS is basically responsible for storing data on the cluster, right? So you need to actually have multiple systems because you want to create a cluster. Cluster is not created in a single system. So can I work with Hadoop on a single system? Yes, on a single system you can work with Hadoop, but the actual functionality of Hadoop you will be able to only see when the data is huge and you are working on multiple systems. If you are working on data which is like 100 MB or even 1 GB, it is not a Hadoop problem. If it's a Hadoop problem, it must be a few TBs of data, right? Then you can actually understand. Then you will actually need multiple systems to store the data and then replicate the data and then work on the data. And then that's where the power of parallel processing, because huge data has to be analyzed. A single program on a single machine will take a long time. So a parallel programming environment on multiple machines will be done easily. So that is where the Hadoop becomes popular. And data files are split into blocks and they are distributed across multiple nodes that we have discussed. Replication factor. So if there are 10 TB of data, it is divided in 10 1 TB machines, but it is actually multiplied by 3. So it becomes 30 TB of data, which is distributed across these 10 nodes. Each node gets 3 TB of data. That's the kind of replication that happens. And each block is replicated multiple times. Default is to replicate 3 times and replicas are stored on different nodes, obviously, to ensure reliability and availability. So this is what happens. There are 5 chunks of data. One file FOO was divided into 3 blocks, 1, 2. The another file called bar, which was divided into 3 and 5. So totally 5 blocks divided into 6 systems. So total, if you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 4, 15. So these 5 are converted to 15. So you see 1 is available at 3 places, 2 will be available at 3 places, like that every file is available at 3 places. This is how this thing. So what actually happens, these are called data nodes. So what is actually happening, 6 physical systems and 1 physical system, which is called the name node. So 7 physical systems. So these 5 data components or data blocks are replicated 3 times and moved across these 6 nodes. This is our data, and the program which is coming here, the program will be also distributed. So HDFS will have 1 name node and multiple data nodes. These data nodes will be controlled by the name node. Name node is having the metadata. Name node stores metadata. Metadata, you all know, data about data. So the data that is stored here, the data about this data is stored in the name node. Then when a file wants to be accessed, somebody wants to read the file, a client will talk to the name node. Name node will return where the files are. The client will go and access those systems and then read the data. So I want to read 3 and 5. So I read 3 from this machine and 5 from this machine. So I got this information and I read it, right? So that is how it happens. Then Hadoop daemons are there. So there are 5 daemons. So we have already been introduced to name node, which is name node is a component which is running here. Name node and data node is logical also and physical also. In fact, a data node can also have a name node. Data node can also work as a name node. So that also is possible. So, but then name node is a component, data node is a component. So in that sense, these components are there. And then there is a secondary name node. Secondary name node is not a standby. It is not a backup, but it has the housekeeping functions. We will understand a little bit, because it is actually, if a name node fails, the secondary name node becomes, or secondary name node has the data so that the name node can be restarted, right? So it is not when the name node fails, it doesn't go to the secondary name node, but when the name node fails, the secondary name node gives the data to it, right? Then you have the data node, which we anyway is where the actual data is stored. Then you have job tracker and task tracker. The main job is split into tasks by the job tracker. So it splits the jobs into map and reduce jobs and distributes the individual tasks. But then there's a task tracker which is responsible for instantiating the individual map and reduce tasks. So this is what we see. There is this again on the name node, job tracker is running. On the data nodes, task trackers are running. In the task tracker, each task tracker, there's a map task and there's a reduce task. When you talk about map reduce, we will see shortly. Maybe after lunch, we will see map reduce. Mapper and there's a reducer. So there are map tasks and reduce tasks. So they are divided into map. So name node having the job tracker, data nodes having the task tracker. The task trackers are keeping track of map reduce tasks, and all the tasks are kept by job. So the job tracker is basically coming as a jar file, and jar file is understood by that and that. So this is how to look at. So if you have a name node, and then you have the metadata which is stored here, then you have the data nodes, and the client wants to access. So this is how the process looks like. It is on rack 1, these data nodes are there. In rack 2, these data nodes are there. So what is the function of name node? Function of the name node is maintains and manages all the information. So the metadata information is available in the name node. So all the files that are stored in the cluster, the entire data is available. So who manages all the information? Name node manages. Why I don't have to remember everything? Because name node will remember everything, right? All the files, all the permissions, all the hierarchy, everything is there. And there are 2 files which are associated, which is called the FS image and the edit logs. FS image is the complete state of the file system nameplate since the start of the name node. So that's an FS image, and there's an edit log. Edit logs are modifications which are made to the recent FS image. Okay, so what are the changes that have been done? They are there, edit logs. So they are available as the edit log. So what happens? So it records every change that takes place to the file system is available in the FS image and edit logs. Now what happens is it regularly receives a heartbeat and a block report from all the data nodes. Data nodes tell I am alive, I am alive, I am alive. Every 30 milliseconds or every 3 seconds or something, you can set up the time like that. So there's a heartbeat. Heartbeat means the data nodes will tell that I am alive, I am alive, right? So it keeps a track of all the blocks in the HDFS in which these blocks are located. And the name node is also responsible to take care of the replication factor. So, but in case of a data node failure, okay, one data node fails, so it takes care of it chooses the new data nodes for replicas, balances the disk usage, manages the communication, and then uses that data node as a new data node because the data is available elsewhere. It brings it to new locations, right? And now the data node, what it has, they are the slave daemons which runs on each slave machine. The actual data is stored here, and the data nodes actually do the low-level read and write request from the system, and they regularly send nodes to heartbeats to the name node so that, and they report the overall health of the HDFS. The frequency usually set to 3 seconds. The secondary name node, what it does is on the name node, it takes the FS image and stores it. So copy the updated FS image back to the name node. So okay, this is when it fails, right? But the name node FS image is there. The FS image is available with the secondary name node also. Then it queries the edit logs at regular intervals of time, right? And all the edit logs are available with it. And the initial FS image, the FS image is also available with the secondary. Let us say the name node fails now because it has the FS image and all the logs that have been there, it applies all of them and updates the FS image with edit logs, creates the FS image which has been lost here. So the FS image is copied to the name node, and when the name node starts, this FS image has been updated by the query logs, edit logs is used. So if the name node fails, the secondary name node will have all the data, but it doesn't have the exact data of what it is there. So the last FS image with all the edit logs, we merge it and we create a new FS image and then send it back to this thing. So that is what the secondary name node is doing. It's responsible for combining the edit logs with FS image from the name node. It downloads the edit logs from the name node at regular intervals and applies it to the FS image. The new FS image is copied back to the name node. Now the block replication is something like this, the huge block, and the block is split into usually 64 MB blocks. So first you see 3 colors here. Now what does these 3 colors mean? The 3 colors mean the file is replicated. Okay, this is one single file which can be split into these 64B chunks, but the 64B chunks it's copied, the files are created, and then again 64B chunks. So then when they move to the data node, you see that they are replicated. You see these two, they are all replicated, right? So we have moved them, and then the data nodes all have this name node. Name node is keeping track of all the data nodes and whatever blocks are there. Let us say FS image and edit log. So all the FS image gets the data and then FS image is created, and later whatever edit logs come, the edit logs are updated to FS image, and then you can do that. And obviously the name node will have the secondary name node as a backup. And we see the block replication here. We see that there are 4 nodes and there are 5 blocks. So obviously you understand that 4 nodes and 5 blocks. 5 blocks replicated 3 times will be 15 blocks. And if you have 4 nodes, so you see that all of these are there and 1 block is left. So instead of 16 blocks, you have 15 blocks which have been copied here. So this is what is block replication. So in HDFS, if you want to read, a client will connect to the HDFS and will talk to the distributed file system. And the distributed file systems will ask for a particular file. So it goes and gets the information. Then it talks to data input stream, and then it goes and finds in which mode it is. So it reads there and then comes back and closes. That is how your reading works. It happens in a similar way. So first you get the information, create the request, then it goes and gets the name node data, then opens the write file, then it goes to the FSD outstream data, and then goes writes the packet. Then packet is written and an acknowledgement packet is sent. So we close the FS data, then we send the complete request to the name node. So this is how. So if you set up how it actually happens in the hardware, if you look at it, this is the name node, this is the client node. Their HDFS client is there, right? You are wanting to write block A, write request, you want to block A. So you want to find out data node 1, data node 4, and data node 6. So when I want to write a block request data node, I send a request from the client. I want to write block A. Block A, it says available in data node 1, data node 4, and data node 6. Is available in data node 4, data node 6, and data node 1. So then it starts to write. So they all three are ready based on this result. I want to write block A. Now, when I go, so because it has to be replicated, I will get 3 nodes. The replication factor is 3. So block A goes and writes the replica request 1. Then it does the replica 2 write request. And lastly, you have the replica write request 3. So 3 requests are done. So first it comes here, it sends the data to data node 1, it sends the data to node 4 and goes the return rate to 6. And maybe in this rack it is not written block A. So that is what happens. In an acknowledgement again, when I want to be write successful, if you want to see the process. So once this thing is there, it says block A is copied, block A is copied, block A is copied. So there's an acknowledgement which is coming. The acknowledgement from 2 and 6 are coming. The acknowledgement for 1 is coming. So the acknowledgement for DN1, DN4 and DN6 is going to client node, and client node says route is updated, and immediately the metadata is updated. Right. So this is a kind of HDFS working mechanism. If you want to read HDFS, a read request comes. I want to read block A and block B. So I want to search. I go to the name node and I search the results. Name node says they are available in data node 1 and data node 3. So I will go to data node 1 and I will fetch block A. I have to search data node 3. I have to go and search it. So I go and search it, data node 3, where I can find the B, because this is the closest. So I said I can get block B from here and block A from here. It comes back to the core switch. You have read DN1 and DN3 and you give the result block A and block B. So this is how this process happens, right? So I'll stop here and we will take up MapReduce in the next lecture. If there are any doubts, I will be very happy to answer. Mostly it is usually one side now, because content is being given. So if there are any questions you can ask, if there are any ideas that you would like to know. I'll be sharing the slides. Please don't worry about it. I have absolutely no problem about sharing the slides. So the slides will come. You can read through, and of course, a lot of this content is taken from various sources. So you can look at those sources also. Cloudera has content. Edureka has a lot of content. So most of these slides will be available, and you can look at them. So if you understand HDFS, now one question that you may have is how do we start? What do we do? So first exercise, if you want to take it, you should try to set up Hadoop. Set up the Hadoop ecosystem. So what do you need? If you want to do it as a single node, you set up a single machine, take a single machine and you can set up a single node Hadoop environment. But if you have, let us say 4 or 5 systems, right, it will be very good. And if they have some 8 GB RAM or 16 GB RAM, it will be very good. Not very costly. RAM is not that costly. With our kind of salaries as teachers, we can buy RAM. 4 systems, 5 systems, if we can create with that kind of RAM, we can connect them onto a network, and maybe they are already on a network. So you just have to find out their IP addresses and then put them onto a cluster. So Hadoop, once it is installed, you can follow what is called Mark Knoll's blog. You can go to any Google environment and just put a search query for Hadoop installation, single node or multi-node Hadoop installation, right? So Hadoop multi-node installation, if you do, then you will understand actually the mechanism behind Hadoop's working, right? And then some of these tools in the ecosystem which you want to use, that tools may be needed to be used. So that is basically what has to be done, right? So these two are the major responsibilities to set up. Once it will take roughly maybe a few days to set up, maybe 2-3 days, right? Earlier, one of the MTech students in 2014 and all, they did it. So it used to take about 3 months to set up Hadoop environment, right? Later, 2014, 2015, some summer interns, students used to work with me. Hadoop ecosystem could be, Hadoop environment could be set up in 25 minutes. The first single node is set up in 25 minutes. In another in half an hour, the entire multi-node, 8-node system would be set up. So it's not very difficult to set up a Hadoop environment. So once you set up the Hadoop environment, then you can practice MapReduce codes or Spark programs, and then that will actually take you a long way. I will encourage all of you to set up, because most of the time we are all good speakers, but we are not speakers, right? We can easily talk about the technology, but we don't want to implement technology, do hands-on. Most of the people are very good, what do you call it, programmers and researchers. But we usually, when I say Indians, we are usually not very strong on implementation. We're good programmers are there, but as teachers, we are not good. We want to only talk, but not do. So I think the challenge with big data, the challenge with data science or data lakes, some of these topics is basically the challenge to implement, challenge to actually see the ground results on the implementations, right? I have some students working on data lakes, some students working on semantic big data. Some survey papers are already there. You can look at my Google Scholar, and you can search for how you want to go about, right? So I'll stop here, and then we will take up after lunch. We will start with MapReduce and Spark and other things. We can further. Any questions?
Sir,
I'm
is
ready.
my voice audible? Is my
Yeah,
voice
yeah.
audible, sir?
Yes.
Sir, from 1 to 2 o'clock we have a lunch break, sir. Again, we will meet by 2 o'clock, sir.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
we are,
Okay, sir.
yeah, stopping here. So we'll log off for it.
Thank you, sir. I request all the participants please join to the meeting by sharp 2 o'clock, and the session will be again the session will be continued by P. Emmanuel, sir, till 3:30 p.m. Please join to the meeting by using same link. If any information is there, we will update you through WhatsApp. Thank you, everyone.